we have with us Mr. Thiagarajan, Finance Minister, Government of Tamil Nadu, with us, and we're very happy that he's agreed to deliver this session. I had initially invited him to come during the day, but he said that he has assembly and this is a budget session and he would still be willing to come in the evening. He's had a long day in the assembly and he's just come back home. And I don't think he had time to even take a glass of water. I hope during the process of his talk, he'll have that. To introduce Mr. Thiagarajan, he's a graduate of NIT Trichy, and then he's also been a graduate from the MIT Sloan School of Management as well as from SUNY, State University of New York, which is a fantastic thing because usually in a business school context, when we are holding a public policy conference, we are always at loss to bring the public policy and the business school context together. And who better than Mr. Thiagarajan, who knows both the worlds. He's been an investment banker, he's been working in Wall Street and Main Street. And for the last possibly 10 years, he's been in politics. He's been an MLA for the last session and this session. And he's been the principal spokesperson for anything which is related to finance and so on. And he holds a twin portfolio of finance and HRD, which is both relevant for us. So it's fantastic that we have somebody who has such a strong connect with the business school and the public policy realm and willing to talk to us. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us today. It's fantastic that you've come. Just as a matter of introduction, we started off the conference this morning with an introductory speech by Dr. Mahesh Rangarajan, Vice Chancellor of P.T.R University. We have got more than 125 papers for the open track and about 30 papers for the special track proposals. We got around 150 odd papers, of which we've chosen 56 to be presented in 2 tracks over 2.5 days or 3 days, in fact. So this year has been particularly good for us in terms of the quality of papers and the number of papers that we have received. We're particularly pleased. Secondly, this is the 16th edition of the international conference, and we have had this uninterrupted for the last 16 years. Our biggest challenge was last year when we went completely online, but now all of us are veterans of life online. Hopefully, by the time we are in the next conference, I hope we'll be able to go back to our original format, and I hope we'll be able to get Minister Thiagarajan to our campus at some point in time and interact with him personally. The other highlight of this conference was a special focus on cooperatives. This is the birth centenary year of Dr. B. Kurian, famously known as the milkman of India. So we have multiple papers that was presented. In fact, Dr. Mahesh Rangarajan also, pleasantly to my surprise, focused his talk on cooperatives and this thing. I hope Dr. Thiagarajan is going to talk about federalism. There is an element of cooperation, but that element of cooperation is different from the Korean brand of cooperation. But I'm sure there is a whole lot that we can learn from Dr. Thiagarajan's talk. Thanks a lot for agreeing, sir, and it's all over to you. Thank you very much.
First of all, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for the kind introduction. And if it's okay with you, I've talked a lot about federalism in a lot of places, the GST and so forth. So I don't want to kind of repeat the same concepts here. I'm happy to take questions on it. And I will try and finish speaking, fairly quickly. But what I thought would be really helpful, since I'm speaking to people at a management institution, is to talk a little bit about the complexity of administering public policy, of administering a government, and what we have learned from recent experiences both in India and around the world, and why I think we actually need a lot more professional and kind of lot more investment in the basic concepts of administration as a country, as a state. Let me say that I'll start from a premise. When I came as an opposition MLA, I assumed 2 things in 2016. I assumed one, that the complexity of governance would be a lot higher than what I had done in banking, where I'd served in very senior positions in large banks, though the quantity of money would be a lot smaller just because we are in rupee country, in a developing country. I had been trading hundreds of billions of dollars in the money markets back in 2001 at Lehman, and overseen 170 billion plus balance sheet as the global head of money markets at Stanchart in 2011, 12, 13, something like that. So I expected that while the money would be a lot smaller, the complexity would be a lot higher. But I also made the assumption that if you were in government, you had a lot more support and a lot more infrastructure and a lot more data than you had in opposition. And so it was just that we were outside the system and we didn't have it. And I assumed that one day if I sat inside the system, like I did as the managing director of the bank, that all the systems would be there and all the data would be there, and the concept of institutional knowledge or memory or continuity was something I took for granted. And I would say the biggest shock I've had after coming to office as a minister in the last 3 months and a few days is that that's simply not true. I mean, the saddest part of administration, as best I can tell, is that we simply don't have anywhere near the infrastructure. We don't have the institutional memory. We don't have the institutional knowledge. And we don't have the continuity that a simple small business would have built into it. Let me explain what I mean by that. Of course, the democratic model is that every 5 years or some period in different countries, you have elections and the government changes. We know all that. But we assume that the bureaucrats and the rest of the government employees offer some kind of continuity, and therefore, people may come and go. Of course, there's a learning curve to be a first-time minister, but there's always a trade-off that generally the older the hand, the more they're well versed in kind of the rent-seeking and other behaviors also. So especially in a place like Tamil Nadu, every 5 years you had a change of this party, that party, this party, that party, with few exceptions over the last 50 years. And so the trade-off you get from having kind of discontinuity in administrative experience is also offset by the upside of having discontinuity in kind of other behaviors that are not good for society. And therefore, that your net result was that the politicians come and go, but then the system is the system. In fact, that's not true. In fact, I am appalled after coming to office to find that we have two huge gaping holes. And the first gaping hole is this lack of institutional knowledge or institutional memory. Because really, you should see all government servants, government staff as two different levels. One is kind of the IAS cadre, the both exam written IAS and the deemed IAS, who are the ones who are mostly in direct contact with the ministers. And then the second is all those below that. In the case of Tamil Nadu, they come from the Tamil Nadu Public Service Commission or through direct hiring or so forth. And that goes all the way from, cleaners and office assistants all the way up to deemed IAS officers who can take the same jobs as exam written IAS officers. The problem is that the continuity and the institutionalization only happens below the IAS level in the government. Those are the people who are hired into one department and very often spend their whole careers in that department. Because as you know, in the IAS level, they rotate all the time. So it's very rare to find an IAS officer who's been in a seat more than 2-3 years continuously. And if I were to take a department, it's very rare to find an IAS officer who has been, 10 years in one department in the course of their career through multiple rotations. And of course, the ministers keep changing. So if you really think about it, there's no, of course, the workaround for this is to have such fantastic data systems and such good filing systems and such great kind of record keeping that people can walk into office and learn all the issues within a few months. In fact, that doesn't exist either. So if you take the combined effect of not having kind of good memory systems, good databases, good there's no such thing as a dashboard. I cannot understand anything about my department from a computer screen. I have to ask some secretary, then they have to write some note, then they have to send me some paper. Sometimes they may know, sometimes they may have come into the job 2 months before. Of the top 7 or 8 officers in my department, for example, in finance, I think 2 of them are more than 6 months or 1 year old, and the rest have rotated in recently. Of course, the irony of this is that regime change also results in IAS officer change because of perceived or real nexus between IAS officers and political, operators of different parties. So the net result is you have a system that is continuously in flux of human beings. And most of the people that you as a minister can speak to are not people of great depth in that department, certainly not of continuity for 10, 15, 20 years to have developed institutional memory. And so this lack of both human continuity and the lack of electronic infrastructure really becomes a debilitating factor and introduces huge complexity in the administration of a government or in the implementation of public policy. Now, some of this is supposed to be offset in the nature of our constitutional model. Some of this is supposed to be offset by the fact that we have a legislature that has a clear role. And that role, as envisioned in the Constitution, goes from basic things like committees that will, standing committees that will address the issues, let's say in Parliament, to vetting of bills, to internal communication, and then dissection of laws and proposed laws and so forth, to functional committees. For example, the reason I'm a bit rushed today, I've just participated in a training session for all the new MLAs in Tamil Nadu, where the topic given to me was to talk about the finance-related committees, which in Tamil Nadu are the Estimates Committee, or a forward-looking committee that tries to help the government frame the estimates for the budget for next year. Public Sector Undertakings Committee, which is a kind of real-time committee which helps with the administration of public sector undertakings like electricity, transport, water, etc. And then the Public Accounts Committee, which is a backwards-looking committee, which looks at the reports from the CAG about things that went wrong and tries to analyze how did they go wrong, why did they go wrong, who should be held accountable, and most importantly, how do we prevent these from going ahead in the future. So in the original design of the Constitution, there was a clear role for the legislature. And this role included all the way from actual legislation support, the creating of bills and laws, to administrative support through such committees, and through kind of sometimes cooperative, sometimes accountability holding role for the elected legislature. Now, already in a system like ours, there's a very close nexus because the government is formed by the party that has the highest number of legislators. So at some level, the legislature has already got a bias towards the administration by the nature of the democratic model we have. But at some other level, if their roles were truly as envisioned by the Constitution, then they add significant value in this public administration and public policy administration. Part of the problem of complexity is also the proliferation of institutions, agencies, boards, public sector undertakings. Politicians like to be remembered. Politicians want to leave their mark. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to come and create a special purpose vehicle for a special need. For example, in Tamil Nadu, we have many, many different housing development corporations. By the sheer volume of entities to be administered, entities to be seen over. And the proliferation also affects your administration, because if you take Tamil Nadu, for example, we went from something like 200 plus IAS officers about 10, 15 years ago to 300 plus IAS officers or so today. But if you look at the entities, there are probably hundreds of entities. There are tens of districts, and there are always pressures to increase the number of districts, to increase the kind of number of taluks and the onriyams and all that stuff. So you're perpetually expanding the scale of the organization, and you're not actually keeping up with the number of management people or staff or the overhead that you use to run these things. So the net result of all of this, I must say, the worst case outcome is what we often see, which is that the lack of adequate infrastructure, the lack of adequate management capability, the lack of adequate sophistication, continuity, institutional memory, institutional knowledge, results in effectively what I would call a failure of governance. And by failure of governance, I mean you're not able to achieve the things you really ought to achieve. You're not able to achieve the real profound fundamental things you ought to achieve, which is to increase people's quality of life, improve the infrastructure and keep up, let's say, the government role as a function of GDP or GSDP, and make sure that people's, there's inclusive growth, that everybody gets to participate in the growth. And so what happens is that we end up with relatively poor outcomes. And if you start with the fact that most of the administration, most of the elected officials who got to sit as ministers also were not particularly well equipped to do this, then you end up with this combined bad outcome of poor performance with poor or no explanations to the people. And in fact, I've commented elsewhere that one of the things that I've been startled by after coming to public life is that there's very little correlation, at least as far as I can see, between the attributes, the skills, the standing in society required to be eligible to get a seat as a candidate of a major party in an election and to win that election in a public space, between the skills and attributes required for that, and you compare that to what is required to actually be a good administrator, let's say, an MBA from IIM who goes and runs a big business, there's very little overlap between these two things. That's true even at the level of an MLA. There's very little overlap in my understanding between being a good legislator and being a good candidate, or being a candidate worthy enough to get a seat. Now you add that to minister and you have a problem that's even worse. And the consequences of poor outcomes mapped to poor explanations is what causes a lot of resentment in society, because people feel that they are excluded from the growth process, but they feel that only they are excluded. They don't realize that a lot of people are excluded, and it's a general failure. Everybody only sees their point of view. Of course, they realize that some people are benefited hugely, whether it is the plutocrats, the oligarchs, or as one of our advisors, Raghunath Rajan, wrote a book many years ago with his fellow professor from Chicago, Luis Ingales, Saving Capitalism from the Capitalists. So what happens if few capitalists get really successful and then they figure out how to draw the bridge up and keep the moat around them through lobbying, through influence of the political process, and it's no longer a level playing field. It's no longer an open market. You get so big that not only are you too big to fail, but you're too big to compete. You can control the system and make it no longer a level playing field. It's now skewed, and the playing field is tilted the wrong way. So if that is a visible outcome, and there is a personal perception of a lack of progress or a lack of outcome, and this is combined with no explanation of why and how this loss came about, because nobody goes out and say, I tried to achieve this goal and it didn't happen because of this reason. Now you have all the kind of ingredients for a whole bunch of people to feel alienated and to somehow feel that they have been kind of, cheated out of something. And I think this is it is of course a developing country's nightmare, but it is also not uncommon to developed countries, because if you look around the world today for the last, 5, 10, 15 years, what you see is an increase in the kind of anti-science, anti-intellectualism, kind of right-wing populism, sometimes violent, sometimes irrational, the anti-vaccine kind of crusade, the Tea Party kind of, as they say in one of the US has very trenchant expressions. And one of them is said, the people are so angry that the answer is no. Now, what is the question? So you end up with that kind of alienation or that kind of negative outcome. And, you can see this all over the world. We've seen this in the US, we've seen this in the UK, the Brexit, and the kind of now, the full realization of the consequences, whereas the vote was more of a resentment vote. We have seen it in Europe, we are seeing it in a lot of places in India. So I think what we're really at a crisis here is this mismatch. What it takes to administer effectively a system of the complexity that we have is much, much better infrastructure that we have, much, much better quantitative kind of systems, continuity, staffing, and delegation of responsibility across all the levels of administration of government, from the union to the states, to the districts, to the panchayats, to the cities, to the villages, etc.
And since that is a really hard thing to do, it is a lot easier for most politicians to do the easy thing, which is to be populist, either populist in arousing emotion and making voting based on that, or populist in terms of announcing freebies or announcing schemes or pandering at the time of elections and say, I give you this plus that plus that plus that. Those are the kind of direct outcomes of a lack of actual governance, of a lack of actual progress. So I think we are now at a situation where we really have to question, why is it that the rest of the world understands these things clearly? All of you at IIM Bangalore or at any leading academic institution, indeed of any academic institution, understand that there is a concept of complexity, that there are established notions of things like organizational design, accountability, alignment of incentives, infrastructure, data, analytics, etc. And so little of that is used in government, and so little of that is used in policy administration, that we are doomed to fail. I mean, it's not rocket science why we fail. We don't do the things we're supposed to do. And there's a clear solution. How do you fix this? You do what you're supposed to do. You do what decades of advances in science and administrative, policy and management science and data and infrastructure and all these things have taught us. And, then the question is, how easy is it to do that? What are the natural forces aligned against these kinds of improvements? And how do you overcome those forces? And I think that's really going to be the key, right? Because not trying to do that is a guaranteed failure of an outcome. And it's going to be the more of the same. You have to do the right kind of appeasement or the right kind of, arousing of spirits and obviously of negative spirits, of a lot of divisive spirits. And it's much harder to go and stand in elections and ask for votes based on, this is what I have achieved for you, this is how much your life has improved, this is how much you should measure me from where to where. And that requires a fundamental change. So I think with that, I will probably conclude my remarks, and I will be happy to take questions, which is probably more likely to be suited to your needs than what I might envision. Thank you.
There are a couple of things, very clearly, I think as academics, we have been complaining that we don't get adequate data. I'm very happy to know that you as a minister also have a similar problem, not a happy situation, but both of us are equally at a disadvantage. But the question is, if we are looking at data, there are two ways of looking at it. One of it is it possible, and particularly given your experience with the information technology division of the party, is it possible that with the advent of technology, level and the quality of data could be much better?
Data is of course an advantage. Data is a huge part of the solution. I'll give you an example right now. We have tried to use data two ways. The first way is that we are, when we are trying to prepare for the third wave, we are taking our data demographically, plus we're doing antibody testing and looking at penetration of antibodies region by region, area by area. And ideally, we would like to have vaccination data area by area. And then we overlay these three and find places where there's low vaccination, low antibodies, a lot of vulnerable people, elderly or young. And then we start targeting those both for increased vaccination of the limited vaccines we get. We get about a third of what we think we can actually vaccinate in a day. And then the second is that we create medical infrastructure and additional support facilities. So we can do that. But, and I give you another example, as I announced in the budget, we are now building a comprehensive family and individual kind of economic circumstance database, integrating information we have from the ration system, from the government employee list, from voter database, from whatever we can get from central agencies, from gas dealers, from income tax, etc. But as you can hear me speak, you can see that part of the problem we have is that a lot of this data is not accessible to the states because of way the constitution is framed and because of the way the union is kind of the predominant data collector as well as tax collector as well as kind of most of the infrastructure, we have a situation where we are not getting any, we're not getting adequate data on which to base our decisions. So one of the things that I've mentioned in my reply to the budget debate last Thursday is that the government of Tamil Nadu through the chief minister is going to make a formal request to the union government to come up with a model or a system for the creation of data sharing between the union and the states, not just for Tamil Nadu, but for all states, and to see how we can improve the availability of data for use.
I'll just read out the question. It's a slightly longer thing. It's evident that the new administrative in and particularly you have been continuously looking at the development of quality for efficient governance, in line with the political philosophy, which is social justice, as you say. Is there a special focus on land database, particularly with regard to Panjami lands? That is the question.
Yeah, I don't want to get into just Panjami lands, but I want to say that overall there's a huge problem with lands, right? I don't know if you've read my budget speech, but I've cited the CAG report that says that 2.05 lakh hectares, about 4.5 lakh acres of government of Tamil Nadu land, which is about 5% of the entire land holdings of the state of Tamil Nadu or the people of Tamil Nadu, is under encroachment, even by the government's own data systems. My best guess is that's a huge underestimate. I have said in the assembly that there are probably thousands and thousands of acres that were leased during the days of the British Raj have expired that we have not gotten back into possession. There are hundreds or thousands of acres of land that were leased by the government of Tamil Nadu or the state of Madras or the Madras presidency or whatever that have not fit the reason for which they were given. We have not gotten those back. So we are an enormously asset-rich state. My friend Rajesh Jain started this movement called Dan Wapsi, if I'm remembering right. And he had a very valid point. He said, how do we, is it conscionable to say that we have a whole bunch of poor people in our state or in our country, and yet we have all these assets that are lying, unused and unlocked. So if you look at it from Tamil Nadu's perspective, I'll give you one example. We decided, the chief minister announced that we would set up a library in Madurai in the name of our former chief minister Kalaignar, and we were looking for a spot for it. And after the first kind of 2 rounds in 6 places, nothing quite fit the bill. When we finally decided that we had to expand, suddenly one DRO said, why don't you look at this place? And it's a prime piece of property, about 2.7 acres on one of the biggest main roads, about 100 meters from my house. And as soon as I saw it, I said, hey, if this is an available possibility, then there are 50 like this. The collector's bungalow sits on 10 acres. The commissioner sits on 8. You look at there are hundreds of acres of government of Tamil Nadu land or Corporation of Madurai land in the most expensive parts of the city. And they're all used highly inefficiently. What do I mean by inefficiently? The person who was occupying this 2.7 acre prime land worth tens of crores in a building dating back to 1912 that was leaking and not fit for purpose was an assistant engineer of the Public Works Department. So surely that was not the ideal utilization of an asset worth 20 crores for such a junior employee of one of the 54 departments of Tamil Nadu. So I think from a land perspective, I would say that Tamil Nadu has done a better job than most in terms of Panjami lands and stuff like that. But I'm relatively new to the system, so maybe my perception is wrong. But I can say with certainty that we are sitting on, just so much. I give you a different example. This is my own house, but my allocated government house is across the street, about a couple 100 meters away. That is one of 50 or 60 or 80 or 100, I don't know, houses between ministers, judges, etc. All of those houses are, sitting in prime parts of the city, and they're, huge compounds, half an acre, quarter an acre, 1.5 acres, 1 acre. But there's no reason why those lands should be used using 1930s buildings, 1920s buildings, 1950s buildings for the utilization of ministers. I think most ministers and judges would be happy to live in much more modern, much more efficient, much more comfortable, buildings and we could leverage those lands. We don't even have to sell them. We could take out, like Singapore does 99-year leases. So land is a huge underutilized asset in most states and definitely for the country. I think there's a lot of potential. As you know, the lack of large land banks or the lack of land parcels is the biggest barrier to having high industrial growth in many cases. We're not able to get the right size industries with the right amount of land at the right time.
Parties in the modern day are constantly using a whole lot of databases and information technology in order to structure their strategy for elections. Would that framework not be applicable to the government, or the government is a completely different animal and too complex for you to manage that?
No, I think you're exactly right. I think that's what I've been saying to my chief minister. I said, how is it that the technologies and the approaches that we use for winning elections is 10 times as sophisticated as what the government uses to communicate with its people? Forget even what you use it for other things, for simple communication. So some things that I think are just undoable. It's very hard to develop the kind of expertise and sophistication within the government that you can do in private enterprise or even in political parties. That's okay. Advertisement is not a tendered business. Advertisement is a flat rate business. So, it's easy enough to find the right agencies if you have the right strategy and to get, it's not a variable cost business. All newspapers charge the same rate no matter who it is. All online ads are the same rate. So it's kind of a cost plus business. So I think the government can, though I don't think the government any day will develop the kind of expertise internally that political parties do or that commercial enterprises do. I think the government can easily find the right vendors and the right contractors at very transparent rates without the question of rent or insider dealing to improve their communications and their databases a lot better.
You were talking about the candidate versus the legislator versus the minister, and what it takes possibly to win the election. And see, there are a range of public purpose institutions and data from there, ADR in terms of, informing better on how good your candidate is, at least as far as criminal records and assets are concerned, or PRS for that matter, trying to inform the legislators on the worth of the bills and how one could do an informed debate within the parliament or the assembly, and other databases, CMI and so on. How would a policymaker look at these outside of government resources, which are so critical, which could be so critically used within both policy making as well as within influencing public opinion?
I have attended many PRS seminars myself. We just renewed our government subscription to the CMI Access. I also hold, in addition to finance and pensions and HR, I also hold the planning portfolio. So, the Planning Development Council and some other strategic thinking. So through that, we also have subscribed to a lot of other resources. I still say that I am probably an exception in the sense that I'm not sure that, even in Tamil Nadu, maybe 50 or 75% of the politicians are capable of realizing and using those things. I'm not sure what that would be in other parts of the state. I'm not casting aspersions. I don't know. But there's a fundamental question here. And let me go back to what you said. The ADR data gives you a lot of information about who has how many cases, who has disproportionate wealth, who has what this. Why does that not affect the election outcome? At the end of the day, politicians reflect society. It's hard to, when I say that these skills don't overlap, that is not a condemnation of the nature of politics or politicians. That is a reflection on the nature of society. People vote with their eyes open. So it is what the people want that they get. The people get the government they deserve because they elect the government that they get. So the real question you ought to ask yourself is, why is it that the people don't really care about whether the person is clean, whether the person is competent, whether the person can administer, whether the ADR data shows 4 cases or 40 cases? My best guess is none of that really matters in many parts of the country. Now, I chose a particular way. I said, that I am here to change the system. I refuse to pay for votes. I've made an open statement twice. And the first time I won by 5,600 votes or something, about 4%. And the second time I won by 34,000 something votes or 23%, because I wanted to prove it can be done, that people are discerning enough that if you are competent and you do good work. But I must say, the reason I won the first election by 5,000 something votes, not because of me. I could have been, good, bad, indifferent, ugly. Because my legacy preceded me, because of the goodwill and good name of my ancestors, I won. The second time, I never mentioned them once. The second time, I said, what have I done in the last 5 years? Am I good enough? So I'm trying to prove that it can be done this way. But the real question you should ask is not whether elected officials know how to use outside data sources. You should ask the question, why do people keep electing officials who may or may not know how to use them? It's what the people elect, right? The people, so the politicians reflect society. They don't fall from the sky. They're not dug up from the earth. If politicians are the way they are, it's because the average voter and the electorate are the way they are. Of course, you can skew things by money, by power, by propaganda, by disinformation, by demagoguery, etc. So I'm not trying to say that people are necessarily, always clear thinking. But by and large, and I've even given you the kind of the flip side of that. That is, if you constantly see failure of governance, failure of public policy, inability to advance people's lives and careers and job opportunities and growth, then the resentment starts. And if nobody has explained why this thing fails, then automatically they assume that there's some conspiracy or there's some irrationality behind it, or there's some bias, or that there must be some villain. And most of the time, the failure is because the system has failed. But nobody wants to believe that because nobody's explaining anything to anybody. So the real question I go back to in your case is, if the ADR data is there, what is the correlation between having a good record on ADR or having a bad record on ADR and being elected? To my mind, the correlation is zero. So what does that say about the system?
I would like to ask, with all your, you have two lineages. One is the political lineage, which comes from, whatever background you come from. You have a lineage of being in the corporate sector and, managing complex activities there. Are there any skill sets that can be used, particularly given the deficiencies you talked about? Obviously, there are a whole lot of skill sets that can come from the corporate world, which can be used in the political arena. But you've talked about lack of data, lack of support systems, lack of a larger ecosystem. So how are you managing? And obviously, having been in the opposition for 5 years must have helped you to get to know the system much better. But in general, how is it that you can take, even as an independent minister, how can you take much more informed decisions using your skill sets that you acquired from outside of the government?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but let me address a couple of points. I would say that if I did not have my legacy, the fact that I was educated or competent or a former XYZ in ABC company had zero reflection on my ability to get elected. That's basically the reality of the world. So the first time I got elected, it made no difference whether I was from MIT or not educated at all. They elected me based on my legacy. If you ask me now, I would say now people say that the real value they see in me is that I actually know my job and I know what I'm talking about, and that's so refreshing for them. But in my mind, the greater asset than all of this, the greater asset than any knowledge, any skill, any education is compassion. And if you have the compassion for the people, if you have empathy, if you're able to put yourself in their shoes, if you're able to understand, and and human nature is not all glory and purity, right? Some of it is base human nature, but you have to see past that, and you say, on average, what is the right thing? On average, what are the kind of genuine expectations? What is morally the right thing to do? What is societally the fair thing to do? If you have that approach to life, I think that actually carries you a long way at the political level, at the people interaction level, at the election level. Then, of course, the question is, how do you administer effectively? Now, there have been brilliant administrators who have never gone to school, but they know how to use the right people in the right way. And I think the single common variable of those who have not had the technical skill or the education or the experience themselves is to have an open mind. Once you have the right values, the right connectivity of the people, the right empathy, the right passion, therefore the right kind of aura around you that you can get elected and you can win enough seats to make a government, then all you need is open-mindedness. You get the 10 best or 20 best people in every field, in every department, and everything. And over time, you develop the skill. I think the classic example of that was our former chief minister, party leader, Palanivel Thiaga Rajan, right? He had very little formal education. And in the first government that they formed after P.T.R. Rana passed away, the opposition told them, he said, you guys are running a third-rate government. You're not fit to administer. Of course, he had the wit to come back and say, no, you don't mean third rate, you mean fourth rate, because according to the kind of caste system, we are from the fourth level caste. So he was able to twist it. But the truth was they were not that good at it because they didn't quite understand. But you do it long enough and then you realize. So by the time, when I met him, when he was really well advanced, on any topic, he would ask 5, 10, 15, 20 people opinions. He would never reveal in his face whether he actually was with you or against you, whether he had formed an opinion that was counter. He wore these glasses so you couldn't tell what he was doing. And he would take all of it in and then he'd just process it around and then he'd come out with a decision. And that is enough. You don't have to do much more than that. People are born with natural IQ, whether they go to good schools or not. So if you have the right IQ and you have the right empathy and the right connectivity with the people, then keeping an open mind and being able to take input is enough. It's only when you start believing that you are all-knowing, all-seeing. And this happens in all departments. It happens in all institutions. It happens on Wall Street. It happens in hedge funds. It happened at Lehman Brothers to some extent. It happens everywhere that you get too successful too fast and you start believing your own smoke. You start believing that somehow you can divine the future or that you're infallible and your thoughts are worth so much. And you make decisions without taking enough input. I mean, I don't want to go into examples because it'll be accusing, people accuse me of politics, but we don't have to look too far back. We look back the past 5, 7 years, and you can see lots of decisions that were taken without enough input that led to really disastrous outcomes. So I of course, it helps a lot to be qualified, competent, experienced in a particular field. I think I'd make a better finance minister than I would, let's say, a health minister. I've never been a medical doctor. I don't understand what goes into it. But I think far more than that is the kind of ability to have empathy, connectivity, compassion, and an open mind and take input.
What GST has done to the federal structure is it has restricted the ability of the state to levy its own taxes, or do a much more precise targeted taxation and have your own local level, because you get into the GST Council and whatever is left to you is, as of now, fuel, excise, land revenue, and things like that, and motor vehicles and so on. How much does that affect your budget making, particularly given that you've also decided to ease a little bit of your tax revenue on something that could have been a milking cow, which is fuel, right? That is one part of it. Second, is there a tendency to push, not necessarily with the state governments or the center, to push a whole lot of things onto the off-balance sheet side, where you create a special corporation and that sort of incurs losses, or you create a SPV which doesn't get into the regular budget but gets refinanced once in 3, 4, 5 years, and therefore goes under the radar. Since you are from the corporate world, you understand the off-balance sheet contingent assets and liabilities much better.
Yeah, there's probably about half an hour worth of response for that. So let me try and keep it short and take the easy one first. Off-balance sheet can be good or bad, right? My first job at Lehman on the commercial paper desk, 1 week after I went in, I got what they call in the US a blanket subpoena. Said, hand over your computer, your hard drive, your papers, your everything, because we were a commercial paper dealer for Enron. And they had just discovered the whole rawhide and all this, so-called innovation of off-balance sheet entities that collapsed. So off-balance sheet entities can be good or bad. You can also have good off-balance sheet entities. Like if you want to do infrastructure funding, it's very easy to get public-private partnerships and set up port companies or road companies where there's a guaranteed tolling kind of revenue. In fact, the history of India is not that good, and Tamil Nadu has been horrendous. We claimed the lady, when former chief minister had a vision, good vision with ADB and other people's support, but when it came to execution, it's quite a mess, and I've inherited a mess that I'm cleaning up in terms of off-balance sheet entities like the infrastructure fund and all that. But it can be done well. I mean, it can be done very well indeed if it's done properly. So I won't get into that. I'd say, off-balance sheet can be for good or bad reasons. If it's for bad reasons, there's a limit. Nobody's that dumb in the world of finance or in the world of, developmental finance. So if you try to push like 5, 8, 10% of your GDP into like off-balance sheet vehicles every year, it's not a perpetual machine. At some point, you're going to hit bottom and have serious consequences. On the other hand, off-balance sheet can be done really well if done for the right assets with the right partners at the right rates. So I won't go too much into that. As far as GST is concerned, of course, GST was a fundamental loss. My friend Praveen Chakravarti and I wrote an article in the Mint newspaper, I think in April of 2017, before GST came into effect. And we said there's a downside to one nation, one tax. And we talked about the specific example of through MGR, then Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, who decided one day he was going to expand the noon meal scheme to all children, irrespective of any means testing, and say whoever comes to a government school should get free food. The estimated cost was so high that there was no way to finance it. So he said, no problem. Tamil Nadu will raise its sales tax from 7% to 8%, finance the meal scheme and get done. I think most people would say it was a tremendous success. It resulted in fundamental improvements in nutrition, in development, in learning, in gross enrollment ratios, in reduction in dropout rates, in reduction in child marriage, in reduction in child labor. It was a phenomenal success. So that we saw this coming, right? So in April of 2017, we said the problem with GST is we lose that flexibility. We are a relatively well-to-do state. We may decide we want to raise some tax for something, for some purpose, and we're not going to be able to. Be that as it may, GST is GST. Now I got bigger problems than the fact of loss of independence, right? The implementation has been so kind of afterthought based, so many hundreds of changes, profound fundamental issues like what should be for approval, what should be for ratification, what should be for information are still being debated 4.5 years later. The whole notion of compensation was designed badly. It was designed only to cope with idiosyncratic risk. When systemic risk came and the system failed, the union could have been much more kind of gallant about it, much more civilized and caring about it, but ended up trying to be very churlish, then ended up doing the right thing kind of anyway by monetizing part of the compensation dues. So, to me as a professional, the implementation of GST has left a lot more to be desired than the basic problems with the concept of GST. And I make this example in a couple of different places. I say that, Tamil Nadu is not just a high production state, but also a high consumption state because we have a very low Gini coefficient compared to most people. And therefore, our per capita consumption is quite high. In places like Gujarat and Maharashtra, their per capita GDP is higher. But because the Gini coefficient is much higher, the per capita consumption is not really nearly as much as ours. It's not as driven by consumption. So realistically, we expected that we should find our IGST in and IGST out should not change that much. If you're a high production state, of course, you're going to lose revenue. If you're a high consumption state, you're going to gain revenue under GST as opposed to your local sales tax. But a place like Tamil Nadu, we should not see much differences. And I would be the first guy to say that we are not that great at compliance in Tamil Nadu. I'll come back to why in a second, or a structural problem with that also in a second. But the data is very clear to us that compliance in other states is much worse than compliance in our state. So we have this like couple thousand crore gap between IGST in and out, which we ought not to have. Now you come to what's the problem with compliance. The problem with compliance is that part of it is done by union government officers in the indirect tax department. Part of it is done by the state. There's an alleged split. It's just, it's not clear who should take care of what. It's not. And the government has tried to make up for bad design and bad execution and bad monitoring and bad inspection by making the laws draconian and threatening to send you to jail and all that, which is not, enough of a stick to change the work. I'll go one step further. In the nature of this one nation, one tax, there are already cracks starting to appear. I attended the 43rd GST Council as a member on behalf of Tamil Nadu. One of the items that came for discussion was, in a further move to increase ease of doing business, should we allow those with less than 5 crores turnover to not just file once a quarter, but pay monthly? Should we move them all the way to file once a quarter and only pay quarterly as opposed to pay monthly? And there was a range of reactions. And I would say, excuse me, the mid-level reaction was kind of Karnataka, which said, hey, this is going to seriously affect our liquidity management and our current asset, current liability kind of adjustment. We pay salaries and other things monthly, but we'll only get these things once every 3 months, as opposed to, on the other extreme, were many of the kind of northeastern and Goa type states, which said we simply cannot afford it because we have to pay our bills monthly, and the small businesses below 5 crores are such a great proportion of our total GST that if they were to pay only once in 3 months, then we just couldn't do it. And there was people like me on the other side that said, in the grand scheme, we don't get enough of our money from the below 5 crores. We're a big state. We have other, kind of ways to think about this. We'll manage. But the two things I pointed out in the meeting itself, I said, A, you have just said one nation, one tax. In this debate, you have come to the point where some people say I'm small, therefore I should have a different model. Some people say I'm big, therefore I should have a different model. Some people say I'm more industrialized, so I should have a different model. So your own, discussion here has shown you why one nation, one tax, one standardized policy is a fallacy. Then I said one more thing. I said, it's appalling to me that all these debates happen in the absence of data. If we had GSTN already calculate and tell us ahead of time before we come to the meeting, here are all the states for whom 50+% of their total GST revenue comes from below 5 crore entities. Here are all those for which is 25 to 50. Here are all those below 25. Something we could have known what to start the discussion with. That data is not forthcoming. And I go one step further. I said, if really the only problem is liquidity management, no problem. You just say, of course, you go to ease of doing business, you file once every 3 months, you pay once every 3 months, but it's not all the same month, meaning you don't all follow the calendar year or the fiscal year. Some people pay January, April, July, etc. Some people pay February, May, August, etc. So you stagger the 3 monthly payments so that you actually get the liquidity in the right place. So there are 100 ways to solve a problem technically, but if you don't have data and you insist that you must have a standard approach, then the system itself is going to fail. It is not sustainable. It's just, one man's willpower cannot make something come true. We are a country of 1.4 billion people. There must be some underlying science, some logic, some data, some thinking, some compromise, some adjustment. It is not possible to make something come true because I say so. We're not in Star Trek. Scotty, make it so, and something happens. And it doesn't happen like that. So I think that's the part that frustrates me the most.
Person representing the business world, you might say GST conceptually, I'm not talking of how it's implemented, is a good idea. One nation, one tax, it's ease of movement, ease of logistics, and so on. Second, if you wear your hat as a minister of a state government, then you suddenly say my ability to tax, decentralization is affected. How do you, square up these two contradictions? That's one question. Then let me ask one more so that you can sort of take both together. Dr. Reddy constantly used to say that the enthusiasm of the states to claim decentralization, that they need much more, from the Finance Commission, etc., is only matched by the reluctance to decentralize further with the panchayats and the municipal corporations and so on. So how do you look at that? So these are the two questions.
Yeah, so I'll answer the second question first, right? I think it was the famous economist, I forget his name, who started the NFPIP. What is it called? The one in Delhi, where the PRS seminars are held, who said everybody wants decentralization, but only to his level, right?
Dr. Govind Rao.
No, I think it was somebody. But anyway, the quote is still relevant. It says everybody wants decentralization only to their level, right? So at some sense that is true, but at least I personally and my party have always been for greater devolution. The Justice Party's concept was local self-governance. The power given to district boards and towns and municipalities and corporations was enormous in the Madras presidency under Dayaki in 1921. We have followed those principles. I have been on record saying that one of the reasons that Kerala does a lot better than us on certain administrative measures is that Kerala is a truly devolved state. Now we have state finance commissions, and by coincidence, after we came to power, the term of the 6th State Finance Commission is still, they couldn't do their work in time, so we extended it by 6 months or 9 months. And my request to the chairman of the State Finance Commission was exactly what, on behalf of the DMK, the representation I made to the Union Finance Commission. Please consider those as my inputs to the State Finance Commission for greater devolution between the states and local bodies, between the state and local bodies. So we try to keep consistent in our principles. Of course, the outcome will tell us. And we are more devolved than most states. We are not as good as Kerala, but we're much better than most other states. Should some indirect taxation be common across the country? Absolutely. Should all indirect taxation be common across the country? Absolutely not. We are not there right now. We have GST that covers some range of products, and then core products, critical products like the energy products, alcohol, etc., electricity are out of it. So if I had to make an ideal recommendation for a model of taxation, I would start fundamentally in a different place. The true lever for taxation for any socialist country, for any progressive and development-oriented welfare state is direct taxes, because direct taxes can be progressive. So the problem starts with the fact that only the union controls direct taxes, and they have been slashing direct taxes as a percentage of GDP or in flat rates by so much that we have become fundamentally an unfair country, much more so than in 2014. 2014 was something like 56, 57% direct tax and 43, 42 something percent indirect tax. Now it's reversed, right? So the OECD benchmark is 60% direct taxes because they're progressive. You know who you're taking it from, so you can raise the rates and the slabs and so forth. And 40% indirect because by definition, indirect taxes, point of sale taxes, you don't know who you're taking it from, and you know it must be regressive. The poor man and the common man must be spending more of their income on taxable goods and services than the capitalist and the rich man who have so much money they do investing and saving and stuff like that. So the problem starts with the fact that you don't have direct taxation at the states. So the long-term solution must include all three things. One, direct taxation must be devolved to the states, at least in part. That happens everywhere. It is true in communist China. It is true in capitalist America. It is true down to cities in China and in America that they can levy direct taxes at a city level, at a district level, at a state level, at the union level. In India, only the union can levy direct taxes, which are really the only fair taxes. So we start from that. Then we say of indirect taxes, which are inherently, regressive and unfair, then surely you reduce the scope of these taxes that are homogenized across the country to truly things that are sold across the country. Milk doesn't have to be. Most people don't sell milk in, ship milk from Madurai to Delhi. Milk in Madurai is sold in Madurai. And so forth. So I think, of course, milk should be exempt. That's a different story. But I'm trying to say there are many products that are local market products. There are a few products, let's say motorcycles and cars, that are sold all over the country. I have no problem with that logic. So the combination of devolution of direct taxation to the states and a fundamental rethink of what should be in GST and what should not be in GST, I think is a long-term workable plan where we can have fairness, some level of independence and decision making and fine tuning and policy making at the state level, and yet homogeneity, which does ease of business and kind of standardization across the country for those products that matter.
You mentioned milk, and I had a chuckle on my face. When I was the claim to fame of Dr. Kurian, in the Operation Flood 1, which was supplying milk to metros. The claim to fame was that there was an insulated tanker that would go from Anand all the way to Calcutta to supply milk. And those days it was not Kolkata, it was Calcutta. But the success of the Operation Flood program is that we no longer do that. And that was the success of the program. But that was an interesting sidelight I just thought I'll bring, given that today we are thinking of Dr. Kurian and we are thinking of cooperatives as a part of the memory. It has been really wonderful to have you with us. And I wish that we will be able to have more informed discussion with people in policy making position and politics, where the things that actually, if you go back and look at the type of research that we do, and the type of papers that we write are exactly the type of conversations that we would like to have. And we are we don't have too many avenues in which we could have this sort of a conversation. I think if it's possible for us to build more bridges, not only with the state government, but also with the union government, it would be wonderful. There are bridges through committees, there are bridges through expert groups, etc., that are built. But as you say, most of the time we are operating under limited data, and even when there is data, very limited transparency. And I hope, given that you sort of represent both the worlds, I hope that at least as long as you're there, there'll be greater transparency and greater data available, not only for you, but for us to sort of critique you, which in turn will possibly help you to make better policies. Thanks.
Of course. Now, let me just say a couple of things. I don't want to end on a kind of note as if everything is bad and everything is difficult. So, we have people elected us for a reason. We came to office because we had a vision. We stood in elections because we thought we had the capability of bringing change and making improvements in people's lives. So, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that it's all doom and gloom. In fact, constructively, I'll make 2 points that we have announced during the last week or 10 days in the budget. One is that it is our intent to work with as many expert advisors as possible in every field. So the Council of Economic Advisors was the beginning, not the end. There's already been one announced for the small MSME sector. I have announced that I'm going to set one up for managing litigation risk, including retired high court judges and so forth. I've announced I'm going to set up one for fiscal federal relations using very prominent litigators and policymakers in other ways, academics and so forth. So one of the hallmarks of our governance will be that because we have ambition for transparency and no fear about anybody going and leaking anything, that we are going to significantly increase the government's engagement with specialists, with erudite people, with knowledgeable people, with people of deep experience. And most of these, as you know, people at that level are happy to serve for free, like our Economic Advisory Council, not even it's all pro bono. So it's a win-win. They get the satisfaction of working for the betterment of society. We get the benefit of their input, and it works out well. I've also announced that we are going to have a pilot internship program where we're going to bring in graduate students like we did at investment banks and consulting companies. I used to be a consultant before I was a banker. And we're going to bring in people from law schools, from graduate schools to help at the beginning with the finance department with different aspects of planning, finance, human resources management, and legal. As we learn, we'll expand that. So those will be paid because young people need to be paid, and we think that they will come with fresh ideas, and their engagement will help us a lot. And then on the other end, we'll take the very senior people who already have made their mark and their money and don't really need to be paid. So we're opening up at least on those 2 fronts, and certainly as we come up with better avenues or greater avenues or more width of any given avenue, we are open to that, and we'll definitely do that. So with that, let me thank you for the opportunity. I'm not sure because only you and I can see each other, so I can't tell how well attended or how well received this was, but I hope it was of some use to the participants of your conference. And I wish the conference much success. The debate of ideas, the exchange of ideas is crucial to the progress of any society. So I'm happy to participate in your conference, and I wish you continued success for the rest of the conference. Thank you.